Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Ietsie Klein channel. I'm your host, Trader. And today I have a very interesting topic to talk about. So, something that I have noticed is that I keep showing you guys WIPs and not a lot of finished objects. I think the last time that I finished an object was in January. So, what I do want to talk about is how I manage my WIPs and then also the impact of doing that when you are, shall I say, multi-craftual. Because different projects have different shapes, and then that means that your WIP storage will take on different shapes as well. Not everything can necessarily go into a project bag. There is different ways and means of how you can store things. In that note of being multi-craftual, the WIP that I do want to show you guys today is a cross-stitch WIP that I started. So this is a cross-stitch pattern from the Witchy Stitcher, and it is a what do you call it? Tarot card. So this one is called Temperance. It has a Tamagotchi design. I'll put up a photo of what the final object should be looking like, because if you just look at my little cross stitches at the moment, it's like you can see the spirit of it, but you can't see the final intention. So this is what I have been working on the past week most. I have been spending a little bit of time on Grant's raglan, but it won't be very interesting just showing you guys this much extra stock in it, right? But yeah, as you can see, what I'm using here is, it's called a Q snap frame. So it is a very interesting mechanism to do cross stitch hoops and tightening. So it has the right tension on here because you can twist these side holders to tension the fabric correctly. But this is shaped quite differently to what a knitting project is shaped like, which is very squishy and you can just shove it into a place. And as you guys can also tell, my relationship with WIPs versus FOs is quite a vibe. So here's my philosophy about it. I am creating as a means of decompressing after work, because my day job as a software engineer is quite stressful. It's very busy, very engaging. So I do all these hobbies to decompress from all of that happening. And the end result of that is that I have a very firm requirement that my hobbies need to be following the joy, as I call it. So I don't want a situation where I'm working on something just because I, quote unquote, have to. I would prefer to work on something because I want to. The other aspect of this as well is that I am very much an emotional crafter. So if I work on something because I have to, I start having this resentment feeling towards the project. And then as soon as that happens, that project is dead to me. I say that phrase a lot because it's almost as if that project ceases to exist. It stops being engaging. It stops being a comfort to me. It starts being a stressor. And I don't want that type of energy in my making. So very often I would start a project because I have a good idea, or I want to try something, or I want to learn a new technique, or I want to learn a whole new craft sometimes. And then when I start that project, there isn't a guarantee that I'm going to finish it. But there is the guarantee that I'm going to enjoy the time that I do spend with it. Because if I get to a point where I stop enjoying working on the project, I put it away. And with that putting it away, I give the project the opportunity to just exist how it is. Because once a project has been started, it's not going to become undone magically just because I put it away. I have the opportunity to come back to it later and continue working on it. And what I've also found is that within projects, you have different vibes with projects. You have some projects that are more mindless, so just plain stockinette projects, or even I've had a cross stitch project that I considered mindless because it was a recreation of the Legend of Zelda map, and it was just swaths and swaths of the same color in green fields for days, and that's mindless. It's repetitive tasks that allows your brain to not necessarily want to like shut down or fall asleep. You are still focusing on what you're doing, but it allows you to process other things while you're doing something mindless. So in my case, it's one of two things. Either I'm thinking about a difficult problem that I'm trying to solve at work, or perhaps in my personal life, or something like that, or I am spending my time consuming media that's difficult to consume. So, for example, anime, where you have to read the subtitles, you can't just not look, you have to look. So, for those types of things and those types of spaces, it's important to have a mindless project, but you can't have just mindless projects as well. You sometimes have to have more interesting projects as well. I find that having at least two active projects at all times, one that is mindless and one that is more active, really helps me to have balance, because depending on what I need the day, depending on what happened during my work day, when I come to my couch and when I come to my quiet time, I have the agency to choose which project I want to go, which route I want to go, but I don't have to actively think about it. I just can instinctually know, okay, it's an active project day or it's a mindless project day. And then I pick up that project. And sometimes either one of those projects reaches a point where I don't want to engage with it anymore. The reasons for that is varied. There might be many different reasons why you want to put down a project. Sometimes it's because the project is being difficult. Sometimes it's not working out the way that you expect it to, or you've run into a technique that you need to apply that's now making a mindless project into an active project, and you don't want to have a double active project, and you enjoy the active projects you're currently having. So now you're putting that one aside. That happens. And sometimes it's just because you've learned the technique you wanted to learn, and now that project is not as engaging, as interesting anymore, and now you want to put it down for a bit. And what I've noticed in my own making experience is that if at that point I start becoming strict and I start having this attitude of, oh, you gotta finish it, it's the rules, then I will never finish that project. I will kick and scream, and I would rather sit in my couch and stare at the wall than work on a project that I don't want to work on. um, but now that also means very often I have different projects on the go at the various stages. And what I do is that I make sure that I have some sort of notes. So in my life, what I do is I do digital note taking on the pattern when I'm working. So whether it is a cross stitch pattern or whether it is a knitting pattern, it doesn't matter. I make sure before I put that project away into the WIP drawer, which I have, it's a separate drawer inside of my desk. Before I put that project into the WIP drawer, I make sure that there's notes that is sufficient enough that if I do want to pick this project up later, that I can do so easily. So that includes what needle I was using, what hook I was using, um, if the yarn that I'm using is not like, if there's future color changes that needs to come, then I make note of which skeins belong to that, so that if I want to pick up a new project and I pull those skeins out of my stash, then I know, actually, wait, this is allocated to this other project, because for some reason in my mind as well, once I've written something down, I'll remember it forever. But if I just thought it, there's about a 50-50 chance I might forget it. So yeah, that is what I do. And I do have that WIP drawer. In the WIP drawer, every WIP is bagged up. So it might be a Woolies bag, it might be a nice project bag, it might be a tiny little zipper bag, it might be even a Ziploc bag, but it's bagged up. And I usually keep the knitting cable in the project, but if I start too many WIPs, I'll start replacing the knitting cables with the knitting loops. However, what I have noticed, once I've put a project on knitting loops, the chances of picking it up again is fairly slim. And I don't know why that is. That is just the way. I try to keep it on cables, and if I run out of cables, I try to motivate myself to finish some projects before I start new projects again. But again, it comes with seasons, and I prefer to have a kindness to myself. So I would rather maybe look at buying an additional cable or doing the knitting loop thing, rather than being mean to myself and being rude and making myself finish something. um, then I do have different stages of projects. So the WIP drawer that I spoke about, that is almost like cold storage. It's projects that I really don't want to think about, that I don't want to like see. I don't want to be remembered about them. Yeah. Then I do have a like rolling trolley that stands next to my couch. There's about, at all times, about 4 or 5 WIPs in there. They're usually WIPs that I'm still fairly interested in, but not actively working on right now. And I want to keep sight of them because I have this thing where, like, if I can't see it, I'm not thinking about it. If that trolley becomes too full, I start looking at them and I decide, do I want to cold storage or do I want to finish? And sometimes asking that question, whether you want to move the WIP, incites you to be passionate about the WIP again. So it's interesting. And I feel like it's valuable to keep it around and to keep sight of it. But something that I am quite serious about is moving them at least about once a week, because I find if you keep it in open storage, and they're not in a project bag, which is why I do prefer project bags, they accumulate dust. And dust that lands on knitting projects or crochet projects, it's more sticky than dust that's anywhere else in your house. So moving them around at least once a week prevents that from happening. I do prefer to keep them in project bags. So sometimes I run out of project bags because sometimes you got to go to Woolies with your project bags and go buy actual groceries. It happens. I'm making so many jokes about the projects bag with Woolies because Janine enjoyed that comment so much last week. But yeah, I'm also enjoying it. But yeah, so I do feel like your relationship to your WIPs have to be a healthy relationship. And I am not at all bashing people who are monogamous knitters or makers. Not at all. Not at all. Not even a little bit. Because I do also see the value in doing that. But I don't think it would be healthy for me to try and do that. But yeah. I've spoken so much now. I think also something important to note is about stash management. So you guys can see my beautiful stash over here. Most of these skeins have ideas attached to them, not necessarily projects with exact quantities, but like directions in terms of what sort of garment I want to make or what sort of project I want to make, whether it's crochet or knitting. I do prefer to have open stash like this over packing it into plastic boxes, but it is 300% because of that out of sight, out of mind situation. If I can see it like this, very often I would come to my stash before I consider to buy additional yarn, which I think is a good thing to do. I don't think you should ever buy yarn without first considering your stash. Because I do think that if you do that often, your stash is just going to continue growing, which can also be an okay thing if that is something you want. I am running out of space, however. So my stash is at the moment very much at capacity. Like the tops of these canes are like pushed in there. I had to put in the minis for the Black Cat Advent set the other day because I was cleaning off my dining room table. And I was like, oh, they're so tight. um, but it does also mean that this space gets moved around fairly often. Um, I don't have a situation where like it doesn't get touched for months and months. I pull skeins out, I put skeins back in, I like move them around and think about them and consider them all the time. What I have found that is I'm just going to share my experience about it. You can make up your own mind. When you put your skeins into a plastic bag, like I've done like here at one point, I'm not sure whether it's because of the plastic degassing, but that plastic bags start getting a feel to them. If you then end up moving those plastic bags around, the way that your fingers feel, the best way I can describe it is sort of when you put liquid hand soap on your hands and you rub it, it's like that, except a little bit more sticky. So it feels that way, the plastic. And that makes me a little bit antsy about what it does to the yarn. I don't think it damages the yarn, but I don't like the interaction, the feel of it. So because of that, I've moved back to having open stash again. I did put them in the plastic bags because I was a little bit nervous about bugs at one point. I was having a weevil infestation in my kitchen, which was extremely fun. And big disclaimer about sarcasm, then it was no amount of fun. I did not like it. I would like to never have a weevil infestation again in my life if I can. So my kitchen is all bagged up and bottled up at this point. There's nothing open, nothing in boxes, nothing, no weevils. Thank you very much. But yeah, so I had a panic and I did try it, but then I decided it's not worth it. And weevils don't come for yarn. Weevil comes for tea and spices and flour. Yes. So yeah, but yeah, I do also think that having it visible, having it available, sometimes incites inspiration as well, because I feel like a stash is a extremely personal expression of yourself. You'll notice that my stash tend to have lots of blues, lots of like light greens, like lime greens, or like more sagey, not quite sagey, but like brighter greens than darker greens, and then tons and tons and tons of pink and purple, but not a lot of red, not a lot of brown, zero brown. We don't like brown, except in the kid silk that was accidental brown. But because of that, it's very easy for me to mix my stash. So if I want to do a project that's in DK, then I can just come and look here. What do I have in DK? Can I maybe purchase one or two extra skeins and then make the project? Or can I hold a fingering additional to other DKs that I have and then make the project? And sometimes what happens is that you just see the yarn and the yarn talks to you and it says, I want to be this, and then you can make that. But if your stash is properly put away, out of sight, I don't think about it so much. I don't consider it so much. And then that connection to it is lost, in my opinion. I know that a lot of people like have much, much larger stashes than what I do. Then you have, I think, you'll have a similar relationship to your stash as what I do to my WIP pile, where you have active stash and cold storage stash and in-betweeny stash. I can imagine that type of thing happening. I don't think my stash will ever grow to that point though. This is probably the biggest my stash has been in recent times. It was a bit bigger in the past, but it was because I was in a different place. I was buying more than what I was making. And at this point in time, I think that I'm buying and making at a very similar pace. Um, so yeah, I think that that's kind of a good place to be in. But I do also recognize that it's different for every person. And I like to share my experience because maybe that sparkles something in you. Maybe it allows you to be more comfortable with how you express yourself with your WIPs, with your stash. Because I do think that the creative process is more than just the time you spend moving your hands. It is from the moment that you start having an idea, whether that starts with a purchase, whether it starts with seeing a pattern, seeing someone else's work, having an idea, seeing a store-bought sweater on somebody else that you want to replicate. There's many sources to have inspiration, but it's from that moment that the creative journey starts. And every step of the way is beautiful. Every step of the way is part of your self expression, part of your creativity. And having reverence for every step of the way, I think, is quite important in the creative journey because everything is connected, everything works together. If you feel any one part is less important or more important than any other part, you lose that connection to what you're creating. And I feel like crafting and creating art and making anything is such a powerful thing to be doing that you want to be connected to every single step that you take in this journey. Um, and I find that philosophy both very inspirational and very powerful. And I like it. And that is also why I don't think I will ever stop making stuff. It might change in terms of what I make. I might focus on one particular aspect of something more or less during my lifetime. But I think that creating is such a big part of my identity that I wouldn't be able to live my life without creating. And I'm really happy about that. I like having the label of artist more than what I like any of my other labels. It's my favorite one. But yeah, got a little bit philosophical there at the end. And yeah, thank you so much for watching and for listening to me sharing my thoughts and how I practice my WIPs and my stashes. And yeah, let me know what you think. Do you think it's healthy to have many WIPs or to have less WIPs? Do you have a particular way that you do things? Do you do something differently to me? And let's have a chat in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you have a fantastic day further, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.